Here on Likuti Sicha is Chelek Yud Ches, the Sicha of Masei, the first Sicha. About what the Parsha says this week, the Parsha lists Eile Masei Bnei Yisrael. It lists all of the travels of the Bnei Yisrael in the desert. Medrash says it's a Medrash Tanchuma, and Rashi brings it, as we'll see. Rashi brings it only partially. Brings it in the Pirush Al What is this a parable for? What is it comparable to? To a king. His son was sick, and he took him to another place in order to heal him. When they were coming back home from being healed, from the medical attention, his father started to count, to list all the journeys that they had made. And he said, here we slept. In other words, on the way to the medical treatment. Here we became cold. Here you felt your head. In other words, you didn't feel well. Similarly, Hashem says to Moshe, count all the places that they've traveled where they have made me angry. And that's why it says, Eila Masei Bnei Yisrael. That's why it says, these were the journeys of Bnei Yisrael. And the Torah makes a point. Now, before they go into Eretz Yisrael, Hashem tells Moshe to list all the places. So we have to understand. When we talk about a mashal, a parable in Torah, it has to be with exact, it's not just a general mashal. It has to be with his exactness. And therefore we have to say that not just is the general context of this mashal, that it's like a child who is sick, and the father's taking to heal him, not just that is similar to what was taking place by the Bnei Yisrael in the Midbar, but also the exact details that the mashal gives, right? There were three details. The mashal said the father, the king, who takes his son to the medical treatment, on the way back he says, you remember, here we slept, here we were cold, here you felt your head. In other words, you felt unwell. So those are obviously, so if we just say it's a general statement, okay, we don't need to understand the details, but a mashal in Torah, a parable in Torah, also should be understood in all its detail. What's the three aspects that this relates to, right? The being cold, the sleeping, being cold, and feeling unwell, feeling your head. So where do we find these three things? In the Nimshal, in what this Mashal is trying to tell us. So we find it. So that's the question. Where do we find these three aspects in the Masois, in the journeys? Question number two. Moreover, from this that the Medrash says only three things, and it doesn't even say v'chulu, etc. So from this, it's imperative to say that these are examples not just for many similar things in the Nimshal. In other words, is muchach. Let me paraphrase. As dos seine dugmos, these are examples. Nit nor if an enlechet sol inyonim in Nimshal. It's not just corresponding to three exact numbers of journeys in the Nimshal, but rather this is encapsulating the entire general journey of the Bnei Yisrael. They can all the 42 journeys can be encapsulated and described in a general form in these three by these three things in the mashal: getting sleeping, getting cold, and feeling the head, feeling unwell. So we have to understand, how is that not just three distinct masois? How does this actually encapsulate all the 42? Gimel, it's understood why when we say here you felt your head, or even when we say here you got cold, we understand why that is a mashal for what Hashem is telling Moshe. Tell them the places that they made me angry, because when we talk about getting cold is pain. Feeling the head, in other words, that's sickness. However, with what is the inyan of when we talk about that over here we slept, how in the mashal is that referring back to something about the king being angry? Hashem says, I want you to say all the places that the Bnei Yisrael made me angry. Here we slept. What's wrong with here we slept? How does that denote anything negative? Interesting. The Rebbe points out in Ha'ara 8, you could say bedeichik, you could say that maybe the mere fact that the son of a king and his son, have to sleep not in their own home, this itself is tsar. Here we slept, like here we had to camp out. We weren't in a palace. We had to camp out. So you could say bedeichik. But otherwise, in simple pshat, the Rebbe is asking, why is Yoshanu? Why is here we slept? relate to what the Mashal is trying to bring out about the places that Bnei Yisrael made Hashem upset. Fourth question is that if you look at the syntax, look at the grammar here, the first two examples that we use in the Mashal is the king says, here we slept, here we got cold, which includes also the king. But in the third detail, here it says, here you felt your head, here you felt unwell. It's Lashon Yochid, singular. Only the son of the king. So how does that fit into the nimshal, the plural, and then the individual? Base. Continues the Rebbe, the reason why the Medrash says these three examples, we slept, we got cold, and you felt your head, you can explain this simply. This is referring to the first three journeys. They went from Mitzrayim to the Yamsuf. There were three journeys. They left, the gathering point in Egypt was Ramses. The Torah says, Vayisu me Ramses. They traveled from Ramses. The first place they stopped was Sukkos. So journey number one is from Ramses in Egypt to Sukkos outside Egypt. Journey number two is from Sukkos, a place called Sukkos, to Esam. Journey number three is from Esam to Pi Hachiros. And Pi Hachiros was already, that's where they were at the encampment by the Yamsuf. And that's where the sea split. So on the pasuk Vayisu mi Sukkos, where it says they left Sukkos, Rashi says, when did they leave Sukkos? They left Sukkos on the second day, because the first day they came from Ramses to Sukkot. So it means, what does that mean? It means there was a sleepover in Sukkot, right? And they left Sukkot the next day. So that would fit very well what we're saying, that here we slept. In the first encampment, indeed, that's where they slept over. It was in Sukkot. They slept over there till they left the next day to Esam. What was the new thing that had been added in the second journey when they went from Sukkot to Esam? So in Pshut Shamikra, according to the simple reading of the Psukim, that's when they got the miraculous clouds of glory of protection. As it says in the Pasuk in Bishalach, the left Sukkot, it says Hashem went before them by day with a cloud of them, with a pillar of cloud, in order to show them the way. So the Chazal tell us that the clouds of glory, besides from the fact that the cloud of Hashem was going to lead them in their way, it also enveloped the entire Jewish people just like a sukkah. As the Pasuk says, this is a Pasuk in the Navi, Pasuk brought in Shulchan Aruch. The Rebbe is quoting here the Chazal, what I say just tells in Shulchan Aruch, that it was surrounding them litzail, to be for shade, in order that the heat and the sun shouldn't affect them too much. So also over here, what is the achievement? What is the effect of the clouds of glory? It was right away when they left Sukkot. So what was their effect? What was their achievement? Their achievement was that's where we became cool. That's why in the mashal this is where we got cooler, because they were cool. This is not a negative thing. We got cooler through the shade of the sukkahs, in this case, of the clouds of glory. What took place in the third Masa, the third journey? The third journey, the Pasuk says that's where the Yidden said, it would have been better for us to serve Egypt than to die in the desert. Which this is a taina, this is a complaint that's based on an intellectual position. They are going against Moshe. They're saying intellectually we would be better off to be in Egypt and die in Egypt than to come and die in the desert. And interesting, the Rebbe adds in Ha'ara 21 here that to add that in all the other complaints against Moshe Rabbeinu, the other complaints in the desert, most of them was simply because they were hungry for bread and thirsty for water. It wasn't an intellectually based complaint. We find, and the Rebbe goes through many of them. He says, in Mora we find, they ask, what will we drink? And in Midbar Sin, where they complained, he says, you brought us all to kill us with hunger. They were hungry. In Mirafidim, they asked for water. And when they asked for the meat, it's because they had a taiva. The Torah says first they had a desire for meat. It wasn't their complaints against Moshe, the rebellion against Moshe didn't start off with some intellectual thing. They were hungry. Right? After Miriam died, there was no water. So they gathered up against Moshe and Aaron. And what was even the time of the Meraglim, um, it was also not based on something intellectual. Um, so basically, you can go through the footnote if you want to see all the details. But basically, this is a classic case. This first complaint against Moshe Rabbeinu is a classic case where chashashta es reishecha. This is in the Moshe. He says, "Here you felt your head." In other words, you felt unwell in your head, literally. And if we move that into the Nimsha, what does that mean? The Jewish people felt their head, they utilized their seichel, and they became unwell in their relationship with the Eibishter based on their seichel. They came with a intellectual complaint. Very interesting, what the Rebbe points out. All the other complaints in the desert were really based on hunger and thirst. So it's not so bad. It's not a here it was they weren't hungry yet or thirsty yet, they were fearful. They came with a seichel dikataina. They said hey, if we weigh up all the options, it would have been better for us to continue to work in Egypt. We'd be alive than dying in the desert. Okay, Gimel. We know that the 42 journeys in the desert actually are allegorically related to the refinement of the desert of the nations, Midbar Ha'amim. Midbar Ha'amim is a concept, knows that there's a place of impurity. Yecheskel, the Rebbe quotes here a pasuk in Yecheskel. Midbar Ha'amim refers to the desert of the nations. In other words, it's a place, I guess it's almost a polar opposite to Eretz Yisrael. Midbar is desert, opposite to Eretz. This I'm just saying, it doesn't say this here. And Yisrael is land of Eretz Yisrael. Here it's Amim. So you have a desert of the nations, which aren't Am Yisrael. What's the purpose of us wandering around in the desert, the Membes Masois, in their deeper context? It's in order to refine the Midbar. And this is also similar to the refinement that we have to do during the time of the Golus. We're refining the world. And where will be the end of this refinement of the world? The culmination of that will be when we get to the Yarden Yerichai, as Bnei Yisrael, right before they came into Israel, they crossed the Yerichai. What is Yerichai? Yerichai is also from the expression of Reach, of smell. What is connected to smell? The Gilui of Mashiach. As we know, it says about Mashiach in the Navi that he will be able to smell and judge. He'll be able to smell and be able to make a judgment. That will be his high level of discernment based on Ruach HaKodesh, on Nevuah. And actually, the Gemara in Sanhedrin says that's the way Mashiach is tested out. If somebody comes and he's a potential Mashiach, Gemara says, check out, is he able to judge based on his sense of smell? In other words, does he have this high level of Ruach HaKodesh perception? But that's in the word Yerichai. And actually, what will happen when Mashiach comes? That's going to be a total cessation and a bittul of the negativity of the desert of the nations. As it says in the Navi, that the Ruach Hatuma, the spirit of impurity, Avir Min Haaretz, Hashem says, I will pass off, I will get rid of it from the land. So we have this parallel journey, the 42 Masois of the Bnei Yisrael and Midbar, and we have 42 Masois in Golus, till we get to Yarden Yerichai, the Jericho River. And what's the Yarden Yerichai? The Yarden by Yerichai. Oh, that's a reference Reach to Mashiach. It says in the Apostle, the same way when I took you out of Egypt, there was Niflois. Similarly, I'm going to show you wonders also when I take you out of Golus, just like when I took you out of Egypt. In other words, in Teres Achsidus it says that the power for the future redemption comes from the opening of the gate that took place when Hashem took us out of Eretz Mitzrayim. Hashem opened up the Geula then, not just for Mitzrayim, he already opened up the power of the Geula, the future redemption. Mashiach's coming. So we understand from this that the cancellation of the negativity that took place by Yetzias Mitzrayim, obviously the cancel. In other words, if what's going to happen when Mashiach comes was already opened at the time of going out of Egypt, so we understand that if when Mashiach comes, there's going to be a total cessation of negativity. This also already started. There's a parallel that we should see in going out of Egypt. Not just is there a parallel about going out of Egypt, but what happened going out of Mitzrayim actually sets the stage and gives the power that when Mashiach comes, there'll be a parallel, much greater, because it's a grand finale, but a parallel expression of cessation of bad. Where do we find that bad was totally eradicated, just like in Mashiach it's going to be totally eradicated? Where we see that this started in the whatchamacallit, going out of Egypt. Just to interject here, that the Rebbe says, we see this and we know this, that what started in going out of Egypt really was already an introduction to Mashiach coming, something that the Rebbe brings very often. First of all, the Rabbi brings from the Maimonides out of the Friedrich Rebbe. He says that in the redemption of Egypt, the what came to the world, there was a big chiddush, and that is the opening for the possibility of Geula. And here's a Maharal that the Rebbe quotes often, which is that when the Bnei Yisrael went out of Egypt, they got a virtue, they got an advantage, they got an egg, so to speak. So to speak, they changed existentially. They became people that are free people, liberated people, and no instance of golus, of exile after that can ever change that. As we know, it says that Hashem says, then the Rebbe continues in the Ha'ara, footnote 27. The Rebbe says, just to point out that Chazal tell us, after Matan Torah, it says, I took you out of Egypt. And Hashem says, I need you to keep my mitzvahs. You know why? Because even if you sell yourself to slavery to be a servant to somebody else, I have a note on you first. I have a lien on you first, so to speak. Shtori koidem. I already have a deal with you. I took you out of Egypt. You got to be my. If there's a note, if you're beholden to somebody, it's to me. So that never changes. In other words, the going out of Egypt and the getting of the Torah, where Hashem says, I took you out of Egypt, that continues forever. So where do we see the cessation of bad, the total bittul of negativity going out of Egypt? As the Rebbe, we've been back into the Pnim, who says that we find this in a revealed way by Kriyas Yamsuf, by the splitting of the sea. It says the Bnei Yisrael saw the Mitzrim dead on the Sfas Hayam. The Bnei Yisrael saw that what? That the Egyptians were dead. They saw with their physical eyes the cessation and the bittul and the death of negativity. That's what that symbolized. So we could say that generally speaking, this concept that our journey in Golus parallels the journey of Masei in Egypt, we could say that generally speaking, this is the explanation why the Medrash and the Mashal speaks about the first three journeys till Kriyas Yamsuf, because Kriyas Yamsuf is a finale in some way. In other words, in these three journeys till Kriyas Yamsuf, what was achieved was reminiscent and similar to the bittul, to the total cancellation and moving away of Tumah through the 42 journeys, which the Jewish people are going to do in Midbar Ha'amim in Golus, till they come to Yarden Yerechai. Then, in other words, these three journeys led them to the cessation of negativity. Then the Egyptians were all dead. By the time they got the third journey was by the sea, and also later on in the general Golus. And we understand, therefore, we also see it in the Shira Sayam. In the song they sang by the sea, what are the words there? One of the psukim is that it says, Tipoel aleim emosav afachad, fear and the dread should fall upon them. And it says, Ad yaver amzu kanisa, till these people goes, Ad yaver am Hashem, till the people go across the Yarden, like Rashi, like the Targum says, and it also says. So, in other words, this Kriyas Yamsuf cancels out the negativity all the way till when they get into Eretz Yisrael. The fact that everybody's terrified and they're able to go into Eretz Yisrael is because already what took place at the sea. So there's, and also we said by Oz Yashir, we see that it's also a song for the future. Because it's Oz Yashir, like Rashi brings, that it's a Lashon Asid, it's a future. Then Moshe Rabbeinu of Bnei Yisrael will sing. When will they sing? Moshe Rabbeinu will come back and Bnei Yisrael will come back. When there will be Tchias HaMeisim, as Rashi brings it, then they will sing again. So you see that the Kriyas Yamsuf and the finality that it achieved with the cessation of negativity, the death of the Egyptians, quite literally, it was something that lasted till they crossed the Yarden, and it's something that lasts and is already and is giving us the power. Really embedded there is the Psichas Hatzin, is the opening of the channel for the power of Gula till our Gula, Mashiach. Dalit. This explanation, however, is only the way that Kriyas Yamsuf, when we talk about Kriyas Yamsuf being after those three journeys. So we say that by Kriyas Yamsuf there was a great achievement that the Egyptians died, right? There was Egyptians died, and that was the great achievement. 1 second, I lost my place here. 1 second. Oops, Daisy. 1 second. Oh, Nachamol. This explanation is only the way the Kriyas Yamsuf was after the 3 journeys we talked about, right? As Kriyas Yamsuf, the Egyptians were dead, just like what's going to happen to us at the end of our Golus. However, since the Torah specifies 3 particular individual journeys, it doesn't speak about Kriyas Yamsuf as being the cessation of negativity. He speaks about the 3 steps still there. We have to say that in those Masois, in those journeys themselves, before Kriyas Yamsuf, there are also, what's relevant to us in our Golus is not just the end, that we have embedded within these Masois, the death of the Egyptians, the end of the Tumah. That's what we're waiting. That's also ready for us now when Mashiach comes. No, because we specify the 3 journeys, it means that in these 3 journeys there are also some general pointers that also help us and also refer to our journey as well. And that's why we mentioned those 3 journeys, right? And in the Moshel, that's why we speak about. That's where we slept. That's where we got cooled, and that's where you felt your head. So in order to understand this, we have to first delve a little deeper to some diyukim in the Moshel. First of all, from the fact that the Medrash is positioned on the words, these are the journeys. These are the journeys of an Esau. And then the Medrash rounds it up and finishes. He says, that's why it says, after he says what he says about the father taking the kid to get healed, and he says, that's why it says, these are the journeys of an Esau. From that, it's understood that with the Mashal, we also understand why were these journeys written. So 1 second, if this is going to explain why the journey is written, so it should have said, not all the 42 journeys, not all the 42 journeys made Hashem upset, right? We said, in the Moshe says, Hashem says also, just like a father takes his kid to be healed, and he goes back and says, here, we did this, we did that. So similarly, I want you to mention all the places where the Bnei Yisrael made me upset. Hello? It wasn't, but there's 42 Masois. Not in all the places did we make Hashem upset? That's one question. Question number 2. In the Mashal, the king says, all the Masois, when does he say, oh, let's remember and reminisce which places we stopped? And they're going back home. And actually, from the expression of the Medrash, the Lashon says, the king tells his son, here we slept. That's mashma, that they're going back through those stations. Right? They're going back to the same place. And then the king says, here we slept. Here we got cold and so on. So we have to understand. That's when they're going back. But in the Nimshal, the Yidden didn't go backwards in the desert. They kept on moving forwards. They kept on getting closer to Eretz Yisrael. So what does it mean? How does the Mashal, where the king's taking his son back home and they're going through the same stations, how does this apply in the Nimshal, where the Bnei Yisrael are journeying in the desert, just moving forward? Says the Rebbe, and I say the explanation this is. The journeys that the Yidden have to go through in Midbar Amim in their journey through Galus is through that the Neshama and Yid generally, what is the journey? The journey is that the derech, in other words, the path is that a Yid comes down from a high roof, Igra Rama, and he comes down to a place of concealment. We don't see Kedusha, we don't see Elikus. And even though the intention, the kavanah of the descent is not just for the rectification that's done in the Midbar Amim, in the coarse world. In other words, because the world is refined through the Avodah of Yidden. So the world is very happy, it gets to its refinement, but that's not just for that does the Neshama go down, to fix the world, but also because the Yid himself gets Aliyah. The Yidden themselves, through their Yerida, through their descent, Hashem says, I'm doing it for you. The Neshamas themselves get an ascent. However, when the Bnei Yisrael, when you're in the actual descent, you feel the golus. What the Neshama feels is the concealment, and the goal is the exile. Only that through that journey of having the great descent, from going from a high roof to a low place, from coming from a high place where the Neshama is, being thrust down into a vulgar and coarse earth, through that, it has aliyah. The actual descent is a descent. And even though we know that the whole purpose of this descent and the Gullus is only for the ascent, however, since in the end of the day, what the neshama feels the effect of the Yerida. What it sees is a descent. He knows that intellectually, if he thinks about it, he knows he's been taught, and he knows that it's going to bring to an ascent. But going in the masa, traveling in that descent, the person feels in a place of midbar. It's a place where, to use the phrase, lo yoshav adam sham, a man doesn't sit there. In other words, adam, referring to kedusha, the man of holiness. It's not a place of holiness. So that is a place where we've made Hashem upset, so to speak. As the Lashon of the Frierdiker Rebbe says, a very interesting Lashon in a Maimer, that the actual essence of Tzimtzum, Hashem, in order for Hashem to create the world, he had to make a contraction. Because if Hashem's Ein Sof light would be in a revealed way, you couldn't have any dimension of world, of any world. So Hashem made a tzimtzum, but the Frierdiker Rebbe says it's heipach haratzon elyon. It's the opposite of Hashem's real will, because he wants there should be kedusha everywhere. But in order to get to a deeper level of kedusha, there has to go through a tzimtzum and a galus. But the actual tzimtzum is, in a way, he says it's the opposite of what Hashem wants. When you're in the galus, you feel galus. Vav continues that. When can we say that? When is the journey felt as an exile and as a distancing from Hashem, as a trying time? That's when we're up to, while we're involved in the actual journey. However, once you come to the ascent that comes through the descent, so then what becomes revealed is the inner meaning of this exile. And truthfully, in emes, it's not something else. It's not a necessary evil to get to the good of the aliyah. It's actually a part and parcel of the aliyah. And here the Rebbe quotes his own sichas. You have to see further other Likutei sichas where the Rebbe speaks about this in depth. That the truth is that the actual descent is a part of the ascent. It's not two separate things. This is the kavanah of what it says in the mashal. That's like the father when they're going back. His father starts to count all the journeys. Here we're looking when we're going back. So it wasn't a physical going back, but it's a conceptual going back. After the descent from Maila to Mata, from above to below, in a place which is considered negative. In all of the 42 Masois, all of them were taking place in a place which is devoid of Kedusha, in the midbar. Then what starts to happen then is the Chazar is going back. In other words, the ability, the gift of seeing how all this is part of the ascent, through going to that descent, was actually leading to an ascent. So chayze means going back in those same journeys. It means rethinking, revisualizing, reframing those journeys and understanding how those journeys were actually part of the great ascent. So it's not like going back physically. It didn't go back physically. And this is what is meant, that he counted all the places. Hashem tells him, count all the places where they made me angry. Just like it says that when Mashiach comes, we're going to say, thank you, Hashem. This is in the Nevuah of Yeshaya. We say it on Nachot Pesach. Oidecha Hashem ki anaftabi. I thank you, Hashem. The prophecy says, on that day we will say, thank you, Hashem, because you acted angrily with me, because you punished me. You're going to thank the Eivishter then for the things he did, which to us appeared to be out of anger, the suffering we had. Because what's going to be revealed then is not just that it led to something, but this was actually in a deeper way, this was part of the ascent. It was an union of chesed in a covered way. However, how can you actually say that when you're in the desert and you're in the Masais? You could say it's part of the aliyah. It's a hard thing to wrap your head around. It's suffering, it's exile, it's desert. So that's why the Medrash says first of Mashal. It's like a king, this king's son going with the king. It's not the king's son going alone on a journey all alone. He's going with the king. And not just he's going with the king is taking him. And not just the king is taking him. The whole purpose of the journey is the king is taking his son to heal him. That's the whole purpose of the journey, not to harm him. So the king, the balabas of everything, taking his son's not alone, is taking him to heal him. And since that's the case, it's obvious, it's clear, like day, that the descent itself is in its internal state, is in of chesed, it's kindness. We could ask, and I did skip over here, a very long ha'ara, which the Rebbe gives. It's a whole, you could say, a whole other sikha in a sikha. I didn't prepare it, so I'm not going to go there. But I just want to call your attention to it. To those that are shaykh to it, I think it looks like it's very gishmak. Ha'ara 40. It looks like a whole. Like sometimes the ha'ara is like a whole sikha in itself. Okay, but let's continue in the pnim. We could ask. Mela, when we're talking about Bishlema, all is well. When we're talking about the general descent into the Midbar Ha'amim, in other words, into the desert of the nations, into Golos, since Lechatchila, the king has that intention, we can understand it must be Chesed and Aliyah, because if the king's taking you on the journey, you're right. You don't have to be too smart to understand. If the king's taking his son on a journey to heal him, it's Chesed, even if it doesn't feel like it. However, what about the places where Hichisuni, Hashem says, you made me angry? In the Masais, in the journeys, there were places where the Yidden sinned. In other words, the Yidden themselves caused the descent through sin more than was planned in the GPS, so to speak, the way the Eibishter had planned out. So why is it imperative to say about this that also these descents are about an Aliyah? Maybe not. Maybe we messed up. Even if you want to say that since the additional mess up is an additional descent, and that causes, when you fix it up, it causes an additional ascent, and therefore you can only reach that higher ascent if you had a deeper descent. And that's why, actually, through getting even more in the mud, through more Yerida, there's an additional ascent. Okay, that's true. However, that seems to be only something that's added from now onwards. In other words, after you get to the ascent, you say, okay, you know what? Really, I guess it looked like a bad turn, but okay, you know what? It brought you somewhere higher. But here we're talking about the actual descent being intrinsically a place where Hashem wants you to go. How could you say it's a place where Hashem wants you to go? He doesn't want you to go there. Okay, yes, through the fact that you got there, you messed up, you had to work harder and you had to get higher. Okay, but that wasn't why you went there. You went there with your own free choice. You messed up. So the truth is, says the Rebbe here, fundamental concept, which if you haven't heard it before, it's mind blowing. The truth is, like the Mittel Rebbe explains at great length, based on what it says in the Medrash, on the pasuk that says in Tilim, Noira Ali Labnei Adam, which in that context the Medrash says it's really a libel. Hashem made an awesome, so to speak, pretext and libel against humanity, because the fact that the Medrash says the fact that Adam Arishon sinned, it was a really alila. It was something that was forced onto him. He's blamed for it, but it really was kind of forced onto him. That was Hashem's plan. And what does the Mittel Rebbe say at great length? The fact that sometimes the negativity of the Yetzer Hara overpowers a person and he sins, is because from above it caused him to. They so to speak instigated the Yetzer Hara on him to bring him to the sin. In other words, he's being, so to speak, thrust into sin. Oy vey, your mind's gonna blow when you hear that, because you say, 1 second, don't we have free choice? The Rebbe says it's not a contradiction to the union of free choice, which is part and parcel with reward and punishment. You can't reward or punish somebody for doing something which you had no choice about. So we talk about schar v'einish. The Torah says if you do this, you get rewarded. If you do that, you get punished. Means there's free choice. It's a critical component of Yiddishkeit. Free choice. That's the whole Torah is telling us to do things or not to do things, because we're choosing. We have to exert our free choice. So what are we saying now? That sometimes Hashem pushes you into the descent. How does that work? He says this is no contradiction, because this help from above, in other words, the help that negativity sometimes gets to push a person down into the muck, it's the way the person doesn't feel it. The person does not feel it, and therefore it doesn't force him to not be able to activate his choice. Just like another broader and very big concept, we say that Hashem knows everything, and yet the fact that Hashem knows everything does not force the person's choice. Hashem knows what you're going to do. That means you have to do it. So how can I have free choice? No, I have free choice. I don't feel what Hashem knows that I'm going to do, but Hashem yet knows what I'm going to do. But I still get judged as if I had choice because I did have choice. But Hashem knew already. It's a vast topic, but the generality of it is the same way. Hashem knows, but that doesn't force you. You feel. Look, everybody can ask himself. Look at yourself in the mirror. Did you feel like you had a choice? Yes. Okay, you're culpable now. Really, existentially, deep down, what the Medrash is telling us, the Mittler Rebbe says explicitly, you know what? When you wake up, you find yourself in the muck. You have to understand. Really, that's where Hashem wanted you. There's a kavanah. Well, if Hashem wants you there, it's part of the journey. So that means to say, this is so inspiring. Let me say also those descents which you think you've gotten this lousy place because of your bad choice, that's also Hashem, and it's with a kavanah. There's an intention here that through doing tshuva for that sin, now you woke up in the muck. You say, "Oh, I got to get out of here." That tshuva is going to bring the advantage of light over darkness that you get only from being in that terrible place. So when you're facing the choice, you have a choice. Don't go there. It's a mucky place. It's murky. It's dirty. It's hot. You wake up, you say, "But I did go there. Does that mean it's over? Hashem didn't want me?" No. Obviously, this is a sign. It's one of your journeys. For what? Not you should suffer. It's part of the journey because you're going to pick yourself up and catapult yourself to a higher place because you're in such a state of distress about where you are. Yes. The difference between the two kinds of descents. In other words, there's two kinds of descents. One, there's the journeys where you feel openly that it's the king taking you, that Hashem is taking them. And the second kind of journey is the journeys which, in a revealed way, they're a result of bad choices of the people. So the king is there, but it's it's a concealed way. So this is generally expressed, these two kinds of journeys. One where you see the king is taking you. It's obvious what Hashem's intention is. And the one where, no, you made a bad turn. And deep down, the Hashem's intention is there, but you don't see it. These are to be expressed. The difference between the journeys before the Kriyas Yamsuf, the splitting of the sea, and the journeys after splitting the sea. Because Chazal tell us, if the Bnei Yisrael would have had this chus, what would have happened when the Parsos Ragleim, I think it's the Parsos Ragleim, Parsot Ragleim. Where's the Parsot Ragleim? Pars of the regel. It's a part of the foot. I think the bottom of the foot. So when the bottom of the foot would come up of the feet, when the bottom of the feet of the Bnei Yisrael would have come out of the Yamsuf, out of the sea, that was as their last part of their body emerged from the sea, they went straight into Eretz Yisrael. In other words, there was a version, there was a route that could have been taken right after Kriyas Yamsuf, Israel. The fact that it didn't happen is because they didn't merit, because they messed up. So the journeys till Kriyas Yamsuf, that was Hashem's plan. After Kriyas Yamsuf, they could have gone straight into Israel. They didn't. That's already the detour that they took. What's the explanation? The explanation is like this. The Midbar literally started, when we talk about the Bnei Yisrael wandering in the desert, in a literal way, it actually started after the splitting of the sea. Everything that they were in, the journeys they had till they got to the sea, was actually a mamutza, was an intermediary, was an in-between stage between being in the metropolis, settled place of Egypt, and being in the barren desert, unpopulated desert. Ruchnius means, as we know, actually, the Rebbe says here, in a footnote, even though compared to Egypt, they are called Midbar. I guess the Rebbe is saying this because we say Lech Techachai. But Midbar, for example, say right after they left Egypt, they're going into the desert. Compared to the metropolis of Egypt, they're desert. But still, compared to the real desert, it wasn't desert yet. Right? And the Rebbe also calls our attention to the fact in the Maimer of Anila Doidi, look at the Torah, that in a person's Avodah, there's three levels. There's Ir, like a settled city. There's a field and there's a desert. Field is also not a place of settlement, but it's not a midbar. What does it mean in Ruchnis? Ruchnis is like this. In the desert is a place where Lo Yashav Adam El Hashem's presence isn't there. A place of klippa, a place of negativity, which opposes Hashem's supernal will. But the way to the desert, so maybe it's stuck another place where Hashem's will is revealed in a totally revealed way, but it's also not a place where Hashem's will is being opposed in a revealed way. It's a descent. You've left the city, you've left the place of where a human can live. In other words, here we're talking about Adam Eli, where Hashem's presence can be in a revealed way, but it's not a desert where there's an opposition. It's part of a descent, but it's part of an orderly descent, an intentional descent, right? Al Pitayra, sometimes there's a descent to bring you to an ascent. This descent is the organized, planned, so to speak, descent. This is why we can understand Bapashtas very simply and in a revealed way. The three examples of the mashal are exactly corresponding to the three journeys till Kriyas Yamsuf. Because only these three journeys were journeys where the king himself is intentionally taking them through this journey in a revealed way. The later journeys, in a revealed way, it looks like they're a result of negative choices that the Bnei Yisrael had, which brought them to a place of lo yizachu. It brought them to a place where they were in a place of not meriting. They didn't merit to go straight from the sea to Eretz Yisrael. Test the content. Now let's understand the content of these three masois. These three masois that the Eibishter took them. So they are, in a revealed way, we can understand now the details of them. Here we slept. Here we got cool. Here you felt your head. Which, remember, these are still not all talking about masois, about journeys where the Bnei Yisrael were really sick, truthfully sick, where they made bad choices. They made Hashem angry. But it's not chet yet. It's not total sin yet. Even when we say, here you felt your head, which seems to denote something like sin, it's still not sin, because Rashi says, in the Maimer Chazal, and there's a Gemara, of course, the Rebbe footnotes everything. And the Gemara in Shabbos, I think, the Gemara says that Kol Mechush, when the word Mechush, Chashasha Ba'alma. Chashashta means it's a feeling of unwellness, but it's not a real sickness. It's a passing thing. Sometimes somebody feels unwell. Here you felt unwell. Not here you became sick. Here you felt unwell. You know why? So let's understand the three inyanim. In order that each should have the avodah of choosing life, right? You need to have three items. In order there should be the avodah of a yid choosing life, it should be his choice and not something thrust upon him that he can't take credit for. You need three new things. In Yonim Mechudosh, it says three, so to speak, new items. One, the neshama has to come down from a place of light, right? It has to come to a place of darkness. Otherwise, it doesn't get the chance to choose. Otherwise, it has to come. Hashem says, I give you a choice. I put you in a place of life and death. I put in front of you life and death. Choose life. So you have to be in a place of death. That means it has to come down from above, come to a place of darkness. That's part of Hashem's planned descent, to give the neshama a choice. The other thing there has to be hachayim. Hashem has to place before you also life. In other words, even when Hashem plunges the neshama into a place of darkness, there also has to be light. He has to inject there midas harachamim. He has to inject there also his gilui, his revealed presence. So there should be able to be a choice. He's put him in a place where there's darkness and death. He has to make sure that in that same place there's also light and life. Gimel, the third thing is, in order there should be true free choice. So even the nefesh habamis has to have intellect. And the intellect has to be intellectual, because he needs to be able to find a purpose in the opposite of light and life. May heaven protect us. Because you look at it generally speaking, you say, and the Rebbe sends here to a long mimer of the Rebbe Rashab, but the Rebbe encapsulate the concept here. If we're to say that the only reason why somebody chooses nefesh abamis. Why does somebody choose physicality? Well, we say, why does somebody choose to indulge rather than to do the right thing? You would say, why? Because he's just following his heart. That unkosher thing, the sizzling unkosher, whatever it is it's pulling him in. And there's nothing intellectually that's challenging him about following the path of Hashem. If you're going to say that the only attraction he has to Movis, the only attraction Nefesh Abamis has to the place of death, the place of not following Hashem, is only because of his midas, because of his emotional attributes. So there's no real balance here. And therefore, when you choose Hashem, there's no true free choice. And therefore, especially, it would need to be, if there's no intellectual gravitas, if there's no intellectual basis to not choosing Hashem, so ultimately a person is an intellectual being. So then ultimately the human's journey would always lead him to choose Hashem's path. So it has to be, says the Rebbe, that there's also an intellectual basis for choosing the path not of Hashem, of Mavis. Because if there's no intellectual basis for that, then when a person chooses based on his seichel to follow his nefesh like to follow Hashem, it wouldn't be bechira. It would just be you want to choose the way of insensibility or sensibility. No, it needs to be that there's some sensibility. It has to make some form of sense. However, we understand that to also following the not good path. That's quite dangerous, right? But that's why we have bechira. So we need three things. The Neshama has to come down to a place of death, and there needs to be injected the light also, and there needs to be also an intellectual ground, also going not in the right way. And these are the three inyanim of the nimshal. The journeys are, here you slept, here we slept, here we became cooled down, and here you felt your head. What is sleep? Sleep is 1/60th of death. In other words, where the seichel is not operative. That is indicative of tzimtzum, in a way of silik. There's no light. Right, tzimtzum, the highest form of tzimtzum contraction, is when there's a removal, so to speak, of light. Maves, Yashano, here we slept. We didn't feel the presence of Hashem. Here we got cold. Oh, what is cold? Cold is to cool down the tzimtzum. Because in tzimtzum, in contraction, there's a deeper intention. What's the intention of the contraction? The intention of the contraction is that the tzimtzum is there should be Hashem hides himself so that he can then draw down a reduced form of his intense light, so to speak, that can be absorbed and be appreciated by the worlds. So in other words, the tzimtzum is, there should be a gilu, there should be a revelation. So that's why it says that Hashem started to create the world with din, with severity, with tzimtzum. He moved in the attribute of mercy. What is that? That cools down the severity and the toughness of the tzimtzum. So he says, here we got cooled down. In other words, there was chesed. Chesed is cold. There was chesed injected to cool us down. As the Rebbe quotes from, the Rebbe brings from other Maimorim and so on, that cooling down is the injection of rachamim. And the third thing is, here you felt your head. In other words, here you had an engagement with the seichel of the animal soul, which gives the opportunity that you could have chosen death, chas v'shalom, and that's what makes your choice of life be so important, be such an achievement. So now we understand why these three things. Only the first two are in plural. Here we got cold. Here we got we slept. Here we got cold, and here you felt your head. Why? Because the tzimtzum, the king himself, has started this concept tzimtzum. Here we slept where there was an absence of kedusha, and then the intention of tzimtzum, which is to bring a revelation, to make the light reduced to a place where it can come out in a way of revelation, which there we became cold. That's the doing of the Melech of Hashem. And here you felt your head. This only has to do with the son of the king. The fact that he has the ability to conjure up that somehow intellectually it would make sense not to choose Hashem. And therefore he has a challenge. Is he gonna follow the path of Seichel that leads him to Hashem, or the path of Seichel that leads him not to Hashem? That is not in Hashem himself. Because obviously, truthfully, real Seichel says you have to choose Hashem. But Hashem injects something in the Ben HaMelech that he should feel intellectually challenged, maybe not to choose Hashem. Yud. As we said earlier, so these descents are also in a revealed way, even the descents that come as a result, what looks like as a result of bad choices of the person, really, we said, right, they're really intended in the first, Hashem intends them also. However, those descents are in a concealed way. We don't feel that the king is actually leading us through the descents. So that's why, really, those three masois, they talk about descent. They're the open descents which Hashem puts the person through to lead him to the ascent. But that's really the story in a concealed way of all the masois. So all the future post Kriyas Yamsuf, where they were loizochud, they didn't merit to go straight from the Yamsuf to Etzol. All those future journeys which came about because of bad choices of man, the truth is they're also all included by these three concepts. And that's why Rashi, we could say that adds here a beautiful thing that in the Yiddish Torah, in the I should say when I say that adds here a beautiful thing, I'm just saying that that was beautiful to me. Everything that says is beautiful. All of Torah is beautiful. I'm just saying that it grabbed me. That in the wine of Torah, in the way Rashi, we can learn deeper into Rashi, not in the pshat of Rashi, but the Yiddish Torah, the wine, like the wine of Torah in Rashi. This is why Rashi adds v'chulu. He says, here we slept, here we became cold, here you felt your head, etc. What's in that etc. in the mashal? There's nothing further. Here Rashi's maram is that also the continuation that happens after the Ben Melech feels his head. In other words, after his seichel leads him astray. In other words, there can be, which there was, a continued descent. All the other masois, all the other journeys after Kriyas Yamsuf, which came about because we didn't merit to go straight from the Yamsuf. In other words, because of bad human choices, where we can become literally sick. So v'chulu, etc. They're really not because of the sun. They're really just a continuation of those three journeys we spoke about before, which are in a revealed way Hashem taking the child to heal him. The continuation of that, where the child deviates and takes the wrong turn, it's really just a continuation, but in a concealed way. We don't feel that it's the king doing it, but really it's Hashem sending us down that uh, down that path in order, as we said before, to bring us to a place of higher tshuva. And that's why it's clear that the whole intention of the chayli, of the sickness, is only in order that the prince, in order that the king's son should come to the great advantage of being somebody who was sick, who got better. In other words, it's like somebody who did zdainos, the sins become zachis, become like mitzvahs. Not just onward, we see, we see that in the end it was okay. No, no, no. And the way that you see in the beginning, in other words, not just that they were Averis and now somehow they get turned to mitzvahs. No, we see that from the beginning they were really just leading. It was never a sin in the first place because it was just a trajectory to bring to mitzvahs. And really, that transformation only happened because in Hashem's eyes, that's really what was happening for the first place. He led in a way that didn't interfere with our bechira, as we said, but he led us on the path of further descent, which came about through our bad choices. But his intention, lechatchila, was to bring us to an ascent. So lechatchila, it wasn't a sin. Lechatchila was part of the aliyah. Wow, that's it's game changing. This will all become in a revealed way when Mashiach will come. Then we'll have the completion of what the medra of the mashal, which says when they're going back. Hashem says, the king says, "Here's what we did this and we did that." The real going back, which we said is we hit rock bottom, we start going back up and showing how the yerida, the descent, is really an aliyah. The completion, fulfillment of that is when Mashiach comes. As it says, that's when it's going to be the revelation of Hashem, like the sun going out in full force. Then we'll be able to see the true and inner meaning of all these journeys that we had in Golos. May it be B'Kodev Mamish Spili in our days. Amen.